"You're too old. I want a younger woman." After 18 years of marriage, my husband said that. Then he filed for divorce. At the hearing, the judge looked at me. "Do you agree to split the marital assets?" I slid an envelope across to him. "Yes, of course," I said, "but I'd like you to read this letter first." The judge skimmed a few lines. Then he looked up at my husband. "I see." His face instantly went pale. 3 months earlier, I was standing barefoot in our kitchen in Ashwood, Ohio, stirring a pot of chicken noodle soup, listening to the washing machine thump off balance in the laundry room. It was a Thursday evening in late March, the kind of gray Midwestern day that made the whole house feel colder than the thermostat claimed. Rain tapped against the windows. The maple tree in our front yard was still bare, its black branches scraping lightly against the siding whenever the wind picked up. I had just gotten home from the grocery store. There were still paper bags on the counter, eggs in one, bananas in another, a loaf of sourdough half sliding out of a third. Nathaniel was late again. That had become normal enough that I no longer checked the clock every 10 minutes. I no longer texted, "Dinner's ready," because he had stopped answering those messages with anything warmer than a thumbs-up emoji. After 18 years of marriage, you learn the difference between a busy season and a man slowly removing himself from your life. I just hadn't admitted yet which one I was living through. I was 51 years old. Nathaniel was 53. We had met when I was 32 at a fundraising dinner for a literacy nonprofit where I'd been volunteering after work. He had been charming in the old-fashioned way, not flashy, not loud, attentive. He remembered little details. He noticed when my glass was empty. He asked about the book I was reading and actually listened to the answer. Back then, I was a branch manager at a regional bank, and I had plans, real plans. I wanted to move into private client services, maybe get my CFP license, maybe buy a little bungalow on my own before I turned 35. I liked being useful, liked numbers, liked the quiet confidence of understanding what people were too afraid to look at directly. Then Nathaniel came along, with his shy smile, his worn leather briefcase, and his dream of starting something bigger than himself. He used to say, "Margot, I don't want a wife who stands behind me. I want one who stands beside me." I believed him. For years, I stood beside him. Then, slowly, without either of us saying it out loud, I began standing underneath everything that had to be carried. When his mother fell and broke her hip, I cut my hours first. When his father's dementia made afternoons dangerous, I was the one who drove across town to sit with him, to make sure the stove was off and the mail wasn't piling up in damp stacks by the door. When Nathaniel decided to go back for his MBA at night, I made dinner alone, paid bills alone, sent birthday cards to his relatives alone, and told everyone how proud I was of him. And I was proud. That's the part people forget when they tell stories like mine. They think betrayal erases the good years. It doesn't. It stains them. It makes you walk backward through your own memories, touching each one like a piece of fruit at the grocery store, wondering which ones were already bruised when you bought them. Nathaniel did build something, a small logistics consulting firm at first, then a bigger one, then one that had employees, and Christmas parties, and a rented office with glass walls, and a receptionist who called him Mr. Reeves. We were never rich in the private jet sense, but we were comfortable. We had the house on Birchwood Lane, 2 cars in the garage, retirement accounts, a lake cabin at Silver Lake we visited twice a year, a framed photo in the hallway of us on our 10th anniversary, smiling in front of the Grand Canyon, like people who knew exactly where they were going. I used to look at that photo and feel grateful. By the time Nathaniel walked in that Thursday night, his hair was damp from the rain, and his jaw was tight in the way it got when he'd already decided something before speaking to me. "Soup's on," I said, because ordinary words are sometimes the last bridge you have. He didn't take off his coat. "Margot," he said, "we need to talk." The spoon stopped moving in my hand. Not because I knew what was coming, but because some part of the body always knows when the room has changed temperature. I turned the burner down. "Okay." He looked toward the dining room, then back at me, as if even the furniture had become witnesses he didn't want. Not in here. So we went into the living room, where the lamps were on and the television was muted on the local news. A weather map glowed blue and green across the screen. There was a folded quilt over the back of the sofa, one I'd bought from a church craft fair years before, because Nathaniel said it reminded him of his grandmother's house. I remember that quilt clearly. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should move it before he sat down in his wet coat. He didn't sit. He stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. I sat slowly on the edge of the sofa. "What is it?" He inhaled through his nose. "I'm not happy." Those 3 words were not a lightning strike. They were worse. They were a door opening onto a hallway I'd been pretending wasn't there. I nodded once, carefully. "How long have you felt that way?" "A while." A while meaning weeks, months. He looked irritated, as if precision were unfair. "Long enough." I felt my face grow warm, but my voice stayed calm. Years of customer service will teach a woman how to bleed internally while sounding reasonable. "Have you thought about counseling?" "No." The answer came too quickly. "Why not?" "Because I don't want to fix this." The rain got louder then. Or maybe I simply heard it for the first time. I looked at his hands, still buried in his coat pockets, and noticed his wedding ring was gone. It's strange what the mind does in moments like that. Mine didn't go first to grief. It went to logistics. Where was the ring? When had he taken it off? Had he been walking around the office without it? Had other people known before I did? "Nathaniel," I said, "are you leaving me?" His eyes lifted to mine. For 1 second, I saw something almost like shame. Then it hardened. "Yes." 1 syllable. 18 years collapsed into it. I pressed my palms together in my lap. "Is there someone else?" He looked away. That was answer enough, but he gave me more. "Her name is Paige," he said. "She works with a client in Rosedale. It's serious." Serious. That word almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because after 18 years of mortgage payments, surgeries, funerals, grocery lists, tax returns, and sleeping back-to-back through flu season, he had chosen that word for a woman I had never met. "How old is she?" I asked. He flinched. "That's not the point." "How old?" 32. I stared at him. 32. The age I had been when he met me. There was a cruelty in that symmetry, so clean it felt rehearsed. "I didn't plan this," he said. "No," I replied, and my voice sounded unfamiliar to me, quieter than anger, colder than sadness. "You just let it happen until it became convenient." His mouth tightened. "I don't want this to turn ugly." That was when I understood he hadn't come to confess. He had come to manage. He had already imagined himself as the reasonable man, the tired husband, the brave soul finally choosing happiness after years of quiet disappointment. He needed me to play my assigned role. Wounded, yes. Emotional, yes. But ultimately cooperative. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the expensive coat, the silver at his temples, the man who still knew which fork to use at business dinners, because I had once taught him. Before his first investor lunch, "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked. He exhaled, relieved to be back on practical ground. "I filed yesterday." The room tilted. "You what?" "I filed for divorce. My attorney said you'll be served next week, but I wanted to tell you myself first." How considerate. "Margot." "No," I said, standing now. "Do not say my name like I'm being unreasonable." He rubbed the back of his neck. "The house will need to be valued. Retirement accounts split. The cabin too, probably. We can do this cleanly if we both stay calm." Cleanly. He had tracked mud through my life and wanted credit for wiping his shoes. I walked past him into the kitchen because I needed air, though there was none in that house. The soup had begun to simmer too hard, noodles breaking apart in the broth. I turned off the stove. Nathaniel followed me to the doorway. Then he said the sentence that would later make strangers on the internet hate him. You're too old, Margot. I want a younger woman. He didn't shout it. That made it worse. He said it flatly, as if he were explaining a preference in paint color, as if my face, my body, my years, my loyalty, my whole lived life beside him had become an outdated appliance he no longer wanted to repair. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then something inside me went still. Not numb, not broken, still. I looked at the man I had loved through debt, ambition, grief, exhaustion, and every ordinary Tuesday in between. And I realized he had mistaken my devotion for weakness because I had offered it gently. I took a clean bowl from the cabinet, ladled soup into it, set it on the counter. He frowned. "What are you doing?" "Feeding you," I said, "for the last time." His face changed, just slightly. I walked upstairs that night without crying in front of him. I locked the bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my hands until they stopped shaking. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand, the one where I kept old birthday cards, passports, insurance paperwork, and a small ivory envelope Nathaniel had given me on our wedding day. I did not open it. Not yet. I only held it. On the front, in his younger handwriting, were 5 words. For when I forget myself, and for the first time in 18 years. I wondered what kind of man had written that warning, and what kind of man had ignored it. I did not sleep that night. Not because I cried, I didn't, but because my mind refused to settle on any single emotion long enough to call it grief. It wandered instead through 18 years of ordinary moments that suddenly looked suspicious. Every late meeting, every business trip, every time Nathaniel had said, "Don't wait up." By sunrise, I had reached one conclusion. I would not make a single important decision while I was in pain. That rule probably saved me. When I came downstairs, Nathaniel was already dressed for work. He had made coffee, something he almost never did, and the smell filled the kitchen with an almost insulting sense of normalcy. "I'll be staying at the Hartwell downtown for a while," he said, without looking at me. I poured myself a cup. "That's probably best." He glanced up, surprised by my calm. "I'd like us to be adults about this." "I agree. We don't need to punish each other." "I agree. I don't want lawyers turning this into a war." "I agree." Every answer I gave seemed to make him more comfortable. He smiled, just barely. "Thank you." I watched him pick up his car keys. "You've already hired an attorney, Nathaniel." His smile disappeared. "So let's not pretend you're trying to avoid a war. You're just hoping to win one quickly." He didn't answer. Instead, he left. The front door closed with a soft click. That sound echoed through the empty house far louder than any shouting ever could. 3 days later, I was officially served. The envelope arrived by certified mail at exactly 10:17 on a Monday morning. The process server was polite, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's not your fault." After he left, I sat at the dining room table with the paperwork spread neatly in front of me. I expected divorce papers. I did not expect a business plan. Everything had already been calculated. The house, the cabin, the retirement accounts, the brokerage account, furniture, vehicles, investment portfolios, even the value of my grandmother's antique dining set had been estimated. Every page carried the same message. Nathaniel had been preparing for this long before he'd spoken those words in our living room. That hurt more than Paige. Affairs can begin with weakness. This required planning. I read every page twice, then a third time. Patterns started appearing. Dates, appraisal dates, financial statements, updated valuations. Some of them went back almost 11 months. 11 months. For almost a year, Nathaniel had kissed me goodbye every morning while quietly preparing to dismantle the life we had built together. I folded the papers carefully and drove to see an attorney. Eleanor Voss had practiced family law for nearly 30 years. She didn't decorate her office with motivational quotes or expensive artwork. Instead, the walls were lined with shelves overflowing with binders, casebooks, and framed thank you notes from former clients. She shook my hand firmly. "Tell me everything." I did. I talked for almost an hour. She interrupted only to clarify dates. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "First question." I nodded. "When did he emotionally leave this marriage?" "I don't know." "No," she said, smiling gently. "You do." I thought about it. Not when he met Paige, not when he filed, not when he stopped wearing his ring. Earlier. Much earlier. When he stopped letting me make financial decisions. Eleanor nodded. "When was that?" "About 4 years ago." "What happened?" "He said the business had become too complicated. And before that, I handled almost everything." She scribbled something. "Interesting." I frowned. "Why?" "I've learned that people rarely change all at once." She slid Nathaniel's filing back toward me. "This doesn't read like a husband who suddenly fell in love with someone younger." "It doesn't." "No," she tapped the neat columns. "It reads like someone executing a long-term exit strategy." Those words stayed with me. Exit strategy. Not heartbreak. Not confusion. Strategy. Over the following weeks, Nathaniel behaved exactly as though Eleanor were right. Every conversation had an agenda. Every email sounded as if someone else had edited it. Every proposal favored speed. Let's list the house immediately. Let's divide retirement accounts before mediation. Let's avoid unnecessary expenses. Let's keep emotions out of this. He repeated those phrases so often, they sounded rehearsed. One afternoon, he asked if we could meet at a coffee shop halfway between the office and the house. "I think we can settle most things ourselves." I stirred my tea. "What makes you think that?" "You've always been reasonable." Reasonable. There was that word again, as though being reasonable meant accepting whatever was easiest for him. He slid a folder across the table. I had someone prepare an informal asset summary. I opened it. It was beautifully organized. Too beautifully. Everything favored equal division. 50-50. At first glance, it looked perfectly fair. Until I realized what wasn't there. Several reimbursements I'd made to the business years earlier. Money from my inheritance that had covered payroll during Nathaniel's second year. A home equity loan we'd taken out in my name. None of it appeared. I looked up. "You forgot a few things." His expression didn't change. "I don't think they're relevant." "They were relevant when you needed them. They've already been absorbed into the business." "Exactly." He sighed. "I don't want us digging through 20 years of paperwork." Of course he didn't. That sentence bothered me all the way home, not because of what he said, because of what he assumed. He assumed I couldn't. Around that same time, I finally decided I wanted to see Paige. Not to scream at her, not to embarrass her, just to understand. After a little searching online, I discovered she worked in corporate marketing for one of Nathaniel's largest clients, out in Rosedale. She couldn't have been more than 33, confident, polished, professional. I drove there on a Friday afternoon. When I introduced myself, she immediately recognized my name. I wondered if this day would come. So did I. She offered to buy me coffee. That surprised me. We sat in a quiet cafe across the street. She looked nervous. "I know who you are." "I imagine you do." She nodded. "Nathaniel talks about you." Present tense. She lowered her eyes. "Sometimes." I waited. "Finally," she said softly. "I didn't know he was still living with you when we started seeing each other." I believed her. Or at least I believed that she believed it. "When did you find out?" "Months later." "And you stayed." She looked ashamed. "I know." Silence settled between us. Then she surprised me again. "He isn't leaving because of me." I looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" "He told me for years that he'd been unhappy." "Years." She nodded. "He always said there were things from the beginning that he'd never been able to get over." Things. He wouldn't explain. My heartbeat slowed. This wasn't the conversation I expected. I had imagined lies, excuses, competition. Instead, Paige looked genuinely confused. "I don't think I'm the reason," she admitted. "I think I'm the excuse." That sentence changed everything. Driving home, I replayed it over and over. The excuse. If Paige wasn't the reason, then what was? What had existed from the beginning? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the question had become impossible to ignore. That evening, I walked through the quiet house, opening closets I hadn't opened in years. Hallway linen closet, garage cabinets, basement storage room. Not because I knew what I was looking for, because instinct kept telling me the answer wasn't in the present. It was somewhere behind me. Near midnight, I climbed into the attic with a flashlight. Boxes lined the walls. Christmas decorations, old tax returns, photo albums, college textbooks, wedding keepsakes. I found the cedar chest we'd received as a wedding gift. Inside were dried flowers from my bouquet, yellowed anniversary cards, and an old leather scrapbook. Beneath it all lay a small stack of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. One of them was ivory. My breath caught. It looked exactly like the envelope still sitting unopened in my nightstand downstairs. Same paper, same handwriting, same ink. I stared at it without touching it. Then I whispered the question I should have asked years ago. "What did you want me to remember?" I carried the box downstairs as though it contained something fragile enough to break under the weight of a single wrong thought. The house was silent, except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking each passing second with patient indifference. For years, I had walked past that little ivory envelope in my nightstand without opening it. I had respected it, because Nathaniel had asked me to. The second envelope from the attic looked almost identical, except for one thing. Across the front, in the same familiar handwriting, were 3 words. "Keep them together." A strange chill ran through me. I set both envelopes on the dining room table. My first instinct was to call Eleanor. My second instinct was stronger. If Nathaniel had trusted me with these on our wedding day, I wanted to know why before anyone else interpreted them for me. I made another cup of coffee, although it was nearly 10 at night. Then I sat down. I opened the first envelope. Inside was a single folded page. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. I recognized the stationery immediately, the little inn where we'd spent our honeymoon on Silver Lake. I unfolded it carefully. The first line made me smile, despite everything. "Margot, if you're reading this before our 50th anniversary, then either curiosity got the better of you, or I forgot the man I promised to be." I laughed once, a sad, quiet laugh. That sounded exactly like the Nathaniel I buried. I kept reading. The letter wasn't romantic in the usual sense. There were no dramatic declarations, no poetry, no promises to love me forever. Instead, it read like a conversation between a young man trying to hold himself accountable. He wrote about fear, about ambition, about growing older, about watching his own father slowly become bitter after decades of marriage. Then came the paragraph that made me stop breathing. "If I ever become the kind of man who asks you to sacrifice your future for mine, I want you to stop me." I read it again. Then again. The next lines were even harder. "If I ever stop choosing you, I'll tell you the truth before I tell myself a lie. And if I ever build my success on sacrifices you made because you trusted me, I'll never pretend those sacrifices belonged to both of us equally." I lowered the paper. My hands were trembling. This wasn't evidence. It wasn't even legally important. It was simply Nathaniel. The Nathaniel who had existed before success, before money, before excuses. I finished the letter. The final sentence was the one written across the front of the envelope. "Keep this for when I forget myself." I stared through the dining room window into the darkness outside. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I reached for the second envelope. Inside was another folded sheet, much shorter, only a few paragraphs. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to whoever has to remind me of this. I frowned. The handwriting matched perfectly. The paper matched. The date matched. He must have written them minutes apart. This second letter wasn't emotional. It was practical. It listed several promises, not legal promises, personal ones. Margot will never leave her career unless it's truly her choice. Any major financial decision affecting both of us will always be made together. If either of us supports the other's dream, that support creates a debt of gratitude, not ownership. Then came the final line. If I ever ask for fairness after breaking these promises, I deserve to be reminded of them before anyone believes my version of the story. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time since Nathaniel asked for a divorce, I wasn't thinking about Paige. I wasn't thinking about another woman. I was thinking about another man. The man who had written these letters. Where had he gone? Or worse, when had he decided to ignore himself? The next morning, I drove straight to Eleanor's office. She read both letters without interrupting. When she finished, she placed them carefully on her desk. Finally, she looked at me. How many people knew these existed? Just Nathaniel and me. You never opened them. I didn't think I needed to. She nodded slowly. I believe you. I frowned. That's important. Very, she folded her hands. Margot, these letters won't decide your divorce. I know. But, she paused, they tell me something I didn't know yesterday. What? They tell me where to start asking questions. I waited. Eleanor stood and walked toward a whiteboard hanging beside her bookshelf. She drew a horizontal line. Every divorce has two stories. She wrote one word above the line. Events. Then another beneath it. Choices. Most people focus on events, she said. The affair, the filing, the assets. She tapped the bottom word. I care more about choices. These letters suggest Nathaniel made a series of choices that stretched back years. How does that help? Because courts don't reward broken promises. My shoulders slumped slightly. I figured. But courts do care when one spouse makes life-changing decisions because they reasonably relied on the other spouse's representations. I blinked. She continued, these letters don't prove misconduct. They don't. No, they prove expectation. She looked directly at me. And now we need to find out whether the facts support those expectations. The investigation began quietly. Eleanor requested financial records, corporate filings, loan documents, tax returns, emails related to major business decisions. Nothing dramatic happened, at least not at first. Instead, small inconsistencies began appearing. Tiny things, the kind nobody notices unless they're looking for them. One missing signature, a reimbursement entered under an unfamiliar category, meeting minutes from years earlier, dates that didn't quite match Nathaniel's version of events. Every discovery raised another question. None answered anything completely. One afternoon, Eleanor called. Can you come in? Her voice was calm. Too calm. When I arrived, several folders were spread across the conference table. She pointed toward one receipt. Do you recognize this account number? I studied it. No. It belongs to the original operating account for Reeves Logistics. I've seen statements before. Exactly. She slid another document beside it. This reimbursement came from your inheritance. I know. You loaned the company $120,000. Yes. It kept payroll going. It did. She nodded. According to Nathaniel's current financial disclosure, she paused, all that money was a capital contribution made entirely by him. I looked up sharply. That's impossible. I agree. Silence filled the room. Finally, I asked the obvious question. Could it just be a mistake? Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into another folder and handed me an email printed on white paper. The sender was Nathaniel. The recipient was his accountant. The date was 15 years old. Most of the message discussed routine bookkeeping. Only one sentence had been highlighted. Let's classify everything as my initial investment. It'll make future ownership much cleaner. I read it twice, then 3 times. My voice failed. Eleanor finished the sentence for me. This is why the letters matter. She tapped Nathaniel's own handwriting. They tell us he understood what fairness meant. Then she tapped the email. This suggests he knowingly chose something else. I felt sick. Not because of the money, because of the timeline. 15 years. 15 years ago, he hadn't simply forgotten who he wanted to be. He had already begun becoming someone else. Eleanor closed the folder gently. This isn't enough. I know. But if this pattern continues, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. For the first time, I understood why Nathaniel had gone pale in my imagination every time I looked at those letters. Not because they condemned him, because they pointed toward a past he had spent years making sure no one would ever examine closely. For the next several weeks, my life became divided into 2 versions of time. There was ordinary time, the kind measured by grocery lists, dentist appointments, watering the flowers on the back patio, remembering to take the trash cans to the curb every Tuesday evening. Then there was legal time. Legal time moved according to subpoenas, depositions, document requests, and conference calls with Eleanor. It measured life in evidence instead of days. The farther we looked, the less Nathaniel's story held together. Not because we uncovered one devastating secret, because we uncovered dozens of small ones. Each one, by itself, could have been explained away. Together, they formed a pattern. Eleanor never celebrated discoveries. Every time I brought her another document, another memory, she asked the same question. Can we prove it? If the answer was no, she set it aside. If it happened but we can't establish it, she reminded me more than once, it belongs in your healing, not in our case. That sentence changed the way I thought about justice. Justice wasn't collecting every hurt, it was proving the ones that mattered. One Thursday afternoon. Eleanor asked me to attend a meeting with Gerald Finch, a forensic accountant hired by her firm. Gerald looked more like a college professor than an expert witness. Wire-rimmed glasses rested halfway down his nose, and his desk disappeared beneath spreadsheets highlighted in different colors. He didn't begin with numbers. He began with one question. Mrs. Reeves, when did you stop receiving complete financial information about your husband's company? About 4 years ago. Did he explain why? He said the company had grown too complicated. Gerald nodded. That's consistent. With what? With the records. He rotated his laptop toward me. A graph filled the screen. The company's growth accelerated about 4 years ago. So did the changes. What changes? The way ownership, reimbursements, and retained earnings were recorded. He clicked another document. The company didn't suddenly become too complicated for you. He looked directly at me. It became inconvenient for someone who wanted to rewrite its history. I swallowed hard. I mean the bookkeeping gradually stopped reflecting the financial reality of the early years. He pointed to another line. Your inheritance, the $120,000. Correct, it saved the company. It did. He opened another folder. The company books acknowledge receiving those funds. Relief washed over me. But, Gerald sighed, they classify them as capital originating from Mr. Reeves. I closed my eyes. Not because I was surprised anymore, because seeing it written in black and white hurt differently. It wasn't just dishonesty, it was erasure. Nathaniel's deposition was scheduled 2 weeks later. I wasn't required to attend. I went anyway. Not because I wanted revenge, because after 18 years of believing every word he said, I wanted to hear what truth sounded like coming from someone who had forgotten how to tell it. Nathaniel entered the conference room wearing a navy suit I had helped him pick out years earlier.
I wasn't immediately referred for an industry awards banquet. He looked tired, older. Ironically, older than he had the night he told me I was too old.
He glanced at me briefly. Neither of us smiled. After the court reporter finished explaining the oath, Eleanor began quietly. Mr. Reeves, who provided the initial emergency funding that allowed Reeves Logistics to continue operating during its second year. My wife and I did. Eleanor nodded. Specifically. We were married. It was marital money. She handed him an exhibit. Please review Exhibit 12. He looked down. It was the email to his accountant, the one discussing how the investment should be classified. His jaw tightened. I don't remember this. Eleanor didn't argue. Do you deny writing it? No. So your testimony is that you don't remember sending an email instructing your accountant to classify funds provided by your wife as your own investment. His attorney objected. Eleanor rephrased. Did you send the email? Yes. She simply made another note. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Every answer Nathaniel gave forced him to move farther away from the man who had written those wedding day letters. That evening, I sat alone on the porch with my neighbor, Dorothy. Dorothy had lived next door for almost 15 years. She had watched our marriage from the outside, close enough to notice things neither Nathaniel nor I ever discussed. I always admired you two, she admitted. So did I. She laughed sadly. I suppose that's the problem. What do you mean? We all admire marriages from the sidewalk. I smiled faintly. She looked toward Nathaniel's dark house. You know something that's bothered me? What? The year his mother got sick. I remembered it immediately. Dorothy continued, You stopped working full-time almost overnight. I did. And every time someone praised Nathaniel for growing the business, she paused. You'd quietly leave early because you had to drive to the rehabilitation center. I stared at her. I never thought much about it. I did. Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Everybody saw what you gave up. Her words landed harder than she probably intended, because Nathaniel had once seen it, too. He had written about it, long before it actually happened. A week before mediation, Eleanor called again. This time, I need you to bring both letters. They're that important. They've become important. When I arrived, she had assembled every major document on the conference table. Financial records, emails, corporate filings, loan documents, my employment history, medical records from Nathaniel's parents showing the years I'd served as their primary caregiver, tax returns, everything. She placed the two handwritten letters at the center. Notice something? I looked around the table. At first, I didn't. Then it became obvious. The letters contained almost no facts. Everything else did. Eleanor smiled. The letters predicted choices. She touched the stack of evidence. These documents prove those choices were made. I finally understood. The letters were never the destination. They were the map. The morning of the hearing arrived, gray and cool. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy suit I'd worn to my retirement celebration from the bank years earlier. Not because I expected to win, because I wanted to remember the woman I had been before I believed someone else's dreams mattered more than my own. Eleanor met me outside the courthouse. You ready? No. She smiled. Good. The people who think they're completely ready usually underestimate what truth costs. Inside. Nathaniel was already seated beside his attorney. He looked composed again, confident, as though weeks of evidence had convinced him this would still end exactly as he had planned. When our eyes met, neither of us looked away. For the first time since he left, I didn't see the man who had broken my heart. I saw a witness about to testify against his younger self. And sitting quietly inside my briefcase, between neatly tabbed exhibits and legal briefs, were two ordinary pieces of paper, not powerful enough to decide a case, only powerful enough to remind everyone where the truth had begun. The courtroom was smaller than television had taught me to expect. There were no dramatic speeches, no surprise witnesses bursting through the doors, no gasps from a packed gallery. Just polished wood, fluorescent lights, a few rows of quiet spectators waiting for their own cases, and a judge who had already read hundreds of files before ours that morning. Real life, I had learned, rarely announced its turning points. It simply arrived. Nathaniel sat across from me in a charcoal suit, his attorney arranging exhibits into neat stacks. He looked composed, almost confident, the way executives often do before quarterly presentations. If someone had walked into the courtroom without knowing us, they might have guessed he was the one who had everything under control. 3 months earlier. I would have believed that too. The bailiff called our case. We stood. The judge reviewed the preliminary matters, confirmed that mediation had failed, and turned to the issue of property division. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, looking toward me, "your attorney has submitted supplemental evidence that was not part of the initial disclosure. Is that correct?" Eleanor stood. "Yes, Your Honor." She handed the clerk a thin folder, not a thick binder, not dozens of exhibits, just one folder. The ivory envelope rested inside. The judge opened it. He unfolded the first letter. He read quietly. Then the second. He didn't rush. He didn't skim for legal conclusions. He simply read every line. When he finished, he placed both letters on the bench and looked directly at Nathaniel. "I see." The room remained silent. Then he said something I will never forget. "These letters are not by themselves determinative." My heart didn't sink because Eleanor had prepared me for exactly that. The judge continued. "They are, however, highly relevant to understanding the context in which the remaining evidence should be evaluated." He closed the folder. "Counsel, proceed." I saw Nathaniel's shoulders tighten. That was the moment his face lost its color. Not because the letters had defeated him, because he understood exactly what the judge meant. The past he had carefully reduced to numbers was about to be examined as a series of choices. Eleanor never argued that Nathaniel had fallen out of love. She never suggested a court could order someone to remain married. Instead, she built something far more persuasive. She showed timelines. She presented bank records. She introduced emails. She walked through payroll documents, loan agreements, reimbursement schedules, and tax filings with calm precision. One by one, witnesses confirmed facts rather than opinions. Gerald Finch explained how my inheritance had been treated inside the company records. The accountant acknowledged receiving Nathaniel's instructions years earlier. Employment records established exactly when I had reduced my hours. Medical records showed the years I'd served as primary caregiver for Nathaniel's parents. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just fact after fact. Each one matched another sentence Nathaniel had written 18 years earlier. The letters had promised partnership. The evidence demonstrated dependence. The letters promised transparency. The records revealed concealment. The letters rejected ownership of my sacrifices. The financial history quietly converted those sacrifices into his alone. By the end of the afternoon, the courtroom wasn't discussing romance anymore. It was discussing reliance, contribution, fairness, good faith. When it was Nathaniel's turn to testify again, he sounded tired. Not defeated, just tired. His attorney asked him about the business, its growth, its risks, its long hours. All true. Then Eleanor stood for cross-examination. She approached without raising her voice. "Mr. Reeves, do you recognize this handwriting?" "Yes." "It's yours." "Yes." She held up the first letter. "You wrote these words before your wedding." "I did." "And at that time, you believed them." Yes." She placed the letter down gently. "Mr. Reeves, no one is suggesting you are legally required to stay married forever." He nodded. "No one is suggesting you are prohibited from falling out of love." Another nod. "So let me ask only one question." The courtroom became perfectly still. "When your wife left her career, invested her inheritance, cared for your parents, and made decisions that permanently affected her own financial future, did she do those things because of promises you had made to her?" Nathaniel looked toward me for the first time all day. I saw something in his face I hadn't seen in months. Not resentment, not anger, recognition. His voice was barely audible. "Yes." Eleanor thanked him. She sat down. That single answer carried more weight than an hour of argument, because it belonged to him. The judge recessed briefly before returning with his ruling. He spoke carefully. This court cannot enforce wedding vows. He paused. Nor should it. He looked down at the file. But this court is required to consider equity. He explained that marriage was more than a mathematical exercise. Equal division did not always mean identical division. When one spouse had reasonably altered the course of an entire career, contributed separate funds, and made substantial financial sacrifices in reliance on representations made throughout the marriage. The letters, he explained, were not contracts. They did not create legal obligations. What they did was corroborate the credibility of the broader factual record. The remaining evidence established that my inheritance had been mischaracterized, that my contributions had not been accurately reflected in the company's financial history, and that several assets required a different equitable analysis than originally proposed. The final order reflected that reality. I was awarded reimbursement for the documented separate funds I had contributed. Additional assets were divided after correcting the historical accounting errors. Several of Nathaniel's claims regarding sole financial contributions were rejected. It wasn't everything. It wasn't punishment. It was justice. Real justice rarely feels theatrical. It feels balanced. Outside the courthouse, reporters weren't waiting. There were no cameras, just ordinary people walking back to work. Nathaniel caught up with me near the courthouse steps. Margot. I stopped. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I don't know when I became that man. I believed him. Not because I thought he deserved forgiveness, because I had spent months asking myself the same question. I do, I answered quietly. He looked surprised. It didn't happen the day you met Paige. His eyes dropped. It happened the first time you convinced yourself that what I gave up no longer mattered. Neither of us spoke again. There was nothing left to argue. He nodded once. Then he walked away. I watched until he disappeared into the crowd. It struck me then that revenge hadn't felt like watching him lose. It felt like finally refusing to disappear inside someone else's version of my life. A year later, I returned to banking as a financial counselor for women rebuilding after divorce and widowhood. Many of my clients believed they were starting over too late. I understood that feeling. Every time I sat across from another woman convinced her best years were behind her. I remembered the sentence Nathaniel had spoken in our kitchen. You're too old. He had been wrong. Not because I became young again, because life had never asked me to. It only asked me to become myself again. The 2 letters still rest in my desk drawer. Not as weapons, not as trophies, as reminders. Promises matter, not because courts can enforce them, because every promise we keep or break slowly becomes the person we are. If this story stayed with you, I hope it reminds you of something important. Love cannot survive without honesty, and sacrifice should never erase your own worth. A marriage may end, but your dignity does not have to end with it. Sometimes the strongest form of revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It is refusing to let their choices define the rest of your life. So let me ask you the same question I keep asking myself. If you found a letter like that one, written by the person who hurt you, back when they still meant every word, would you use it? Or would it be too painful to even open? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read every single one. And I think a lot of you have your own version of that envelope somewhere. If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe so you don't miss what's next in this series. And go watch the follow-up, because Margot's not the only one who found her letter too late.